We finally had the details for what we thought was going to be Uncanny X-Men number 700. It turns out it's just X-Men 700 with X-Men 35, which I guess is going to be the last hurrah, and the return of at least one Legend 2 X-Men before we get the big reboot here, Doc. I know you've talked about this. I don't want you to get too in depth because you could do 20 minutes alone on why it's not really X-Men 700, but the numbering is suspect.
The numbering was suspect when it was going to be Uncanny X-Men 700. The fact that they're making it X-Men 700 makes the math just laughable. It's not even in the realm of possibilities. At best, it's like 500. Fuck it. Just stick whatever the hell number you want on it. Make it X-Men 1 billion. I don't care. The math don't math, so fine, whatever. Artificial milestones are going to artificial milestone.
It's a Marvel thing. It's what they do, but we do have some details. Marvel Comics has revealed that X-Men 35 is an extra-sized send-off for the Krakoa era, out June 5th, also serving as the milestone 700th issue of Uncanny X-Men. The issue will feature creators Gerry Duggan, Kieron Gillen, Al Ewing, Lucas Wernick, Josh Cassara, Gail Simone, and more. The giant-sized issue will also feature a story of a family by X-Men master Chris Claremont and offer a glimpse of things to come in the new X-Men titles launching this summer. Not exactly what I would consider a celebration when it's just teasing the upcoming storylines that are going to be introduced by Gail Simone and the other new writers associated with Tom Revort, and then obviously closing the book on Gerry Duggan, Kieron Gillen, Al Ewing, and the Krakoa era, which was so unsuccessful that Buckley actually had to come down and remove the group editor and make them reboot it.
It's a send-off for an era that nobody wants a send-off for. That's teasing an era that nobody's really hyped for, using a bunch of creators other than Chris Claremont. Almost nobody would actually pay money to go see on their own. Is it nice to have Chris doing an X-Men story again? Yeah, I guess. But again, his strength lies in long form, not one-off and one-shot shoved into the back of a artificial anniversary.
And the worst part is a lot of the classic X-Men creators that have been associated with the line, they're still with us. Louise Simonson is still willing and able to write comic books. She's available. Obviously, she had a great influence on the X-Men. We did get Chris Claremont, but, Fabian Nicieza has done a lot of great stuff with X-Men. We've seen Marc Silvestri work with DC Comics. Obviously, he's synonymous with X-Men. Gerry Duggan and Kieron Gillen and Al Ewing just quite frankly aren't synonymous with X-Men. Gail Simone certainly isn't, but she is kicking off the next generation. I guess if you wanted to throw her story at the end, I would kind of understand that. But it should be a much better celebration than it is. We are missing so many great creators that are still around.
We really are. I mean, you have Chris there, but Joe Kelly, Joe Casey, Steve Siegel, they're all available. I mean, you give me shit about it, but Scott Lobdell is completely available. John Byrne has been basically doing his own thing for the last decade. Willis Portacio, Art T-Bear, and all these other artists that are really synonymous with X-Men, they're all still out there. They're all still doing freelance work. You couldn't have called one of them. No, instead you end up with a bunch of people that really are only synonymous with the X-Men decline and making it a laughingstock of the comics reading side and the comics industry in a almost textbook definition of how to completely bury a franchise that used to be your number one in just 5 short years. I mean, X-Men was already in a little bit of decline, but they put that on steroids and ran it square into the ground. It went so far into the ground, it came out in fucking China.
Well, it's interesting. We do have Gerry Duggan, Kieron Gillen, Al Ewing. They are the faces of X-Men since Jonathan Hickman left. Kieron Gillen certainly worked with X-Men prior to this, but the other two not so much. Out of the three, which one do you think is going to come away with the best reputation with X-Men fans?
I'm going to still go with probably Kieron Gillen. As much as I can't stand anything that he's really done, he's been the closest thing to competent in that office. Gerry Duggan has been a laughingstock. Al Ewing hasn't done anything of any fucking consequence the entire time he's been there. He's started and stopped more storylines than I can count. He's probably the least offensive, but that's just because he didn't fucking accomplish anything.
Now, we do already have a little bit of controversy regarding the comic book, not for what we're talking about, but because of the cover. Artist Pepe the Ras provided the wraparound cover scene here, which includes many of the main characters of the Krakoa era, along with Xavier and Magneto in their classic incarnations, perhaps hinting at what their status quo may be when the new X-Men era starts later this year. I don't know if you saw this, or maybe people did. I know there was a video about it, but a lot of people ended up piling on Pepe the Raz. They didn't feel there was enough POC representation and not enough homosexual, bisexual representation within the cover itself. And I guess Pepe the Raz was trying to show the most relevant, popular X-Men characters over the entirety of the franchise, but he forgot Sync, and that's just a no-no for a certain reason.
Yeah, the character that's been dead probably longer than they've been alive since they were first introduced back during the Phalanx Covenant. Yeah, they forgot that character that doesn't fucking matter and that has never mattered and is just diversity checkbox version of Rogue.
I kind of feel bad for Pepe the Raz. Obviously, he's not American. You know, he is a Spaniard or whatever, and he made the cardinal sin. He made the mistake of acknowledging the criticism and then actually kind of apologizing for it, which was basically just a green light for more people to go in and pile on him and more people to go in and chime in and point out every other thing that they didn't like about the cover, even though it's a pretty sweet looking cover.
The idea of getting pissed off at representation on an X-Men cover is just plain retarded. Now, Pepe Larraz, I feel bad for the guy, but he should have listened to his friend and collaborator, Mark Miller, and just ignored the cancel pig mafia coming for him on the internet. Ignore them. They don't matter. What are these 12 psychos on Twitter going to do? Not buy your comic that they're already pirating anyway? Who cares? Fuck broke communists. They don't matter.
Yeah, that's too bad. You always have to have your give a fucktitude meter set to 0. That's where I have mine. Now, I do think there is something worth having a conversation about, because there is a cover from Puck Artist and the Myth of the Color. The artist's name was Garrett Richard. Now, it's certainly, he didn't swipe it because he didn't trace or anything like that, but he did seem to swipe the concept of the cover that was already out there, and it seems like the guy that created the book wasn't very happy that Marvel was out there kind of lifting the idea from his graphic novel and throwing it onto X-Men 700.
Look, I can understand that, but I'm pretty sure I've seen this design and this cover kind of layout where it's big stuff at the far left and it works its way down to small stuff at the far right. And it's kind of like this wedge shape overall design to the layout. I'm pretty sure I've seen this on more than just this other graphic artist's book before. I'm pretty sure I've seen this layout before, and I'm pretty sure he's not the one that came up with it. And
there's too many similarities for me to believe that he just happened to come up with the exact same concept, but it is very effective because the way that it's laid out and the use of negative space on the cover, like, gives it like a movement to it, as you can see everything's moving to the right.
It does. I mean, it gives. Now, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. I don't care. I'm pretty sure I've seen this on a number of other things too. So I feel like that's just blowing something wildly out of proportion. And maybe this dude has a right to get, all butthurt about it, but I don't think he came up with it either.
We're hoping for a new era of X-Men, kind of getting rid of the Krakoan era. And along with Krakoan era, we want the editors to go away, and we certainly want all the creators to go away. But we do have a new series featuring one of the really bad writers during the Krakoan era that's going to be coming out, after X-Men 700 and theoretically during the reboot itself. Before the X-Men enter a new age this summer, a challenge must be held to determine who will inherit Apocalypse's sacred responsibility. In X-Men Heir of Apocalypse, written by Steve Fox, this 4-issue limited series kicks off in May and sees the X-Men's former archenemy gather 12 mutants for an epic tournament to discover who is fit enough to take his place. After the trials that test the heart, body, mind, and soul, one will emerge to boldly follow in Apocalypse's mighty footsteps. I certainly hope this does not portend that Steve Fox is on the Tom Brevoort team when it comes to X-Men.
I have a feeling that it is. I feel like that's a indication that he's not leaving, but he seems like a first ringer, the kind of guy that when nobody else wants to actually do the work, you can call and he'll still answer on the first ring and take the gig. I don't see a reason for this. I feel like the more that they just kind of put an end to the Krakoan era and all of the trappings that go along with it, the better they are for any sort of reboot. But it seems like they are being very, very, very fucking stubborn about this. They're being forced to do it, and they're going to go kicking and screaming into doing it. And it looks like this is another one of those poison pills they're shoving in to undermine any sort of ability to drastically change the line or to reset it back to something that actually fucking sold in the past. The idea that half of these characters would even want to speak to Apocalypse, much less compete in his tournament to take his place. I fail to see how any of this fucking works. They never even sold me on Apocalypse changing and becoming something else in the first place. So they're definitely not going to sell me on this. And having Cable as part of, the participants in this is basically just screaming at me, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And I know fuck all about, the history between Cable and Apocalypse.
It kind of seems weird that they're doing another tournament. I remember recently in Jason Aaron's Avengers, we had the Phoenix tournament, discover who was going to be the new host of the Phoenix. We also had like Contest of Champions, I think just happened within the last 12 months. I like Bloodsport. I like Kickboxer. I like Enter the Dragon. I like Mortal Kombat, but I don't know that they actually work for X-Men comic books. I guess we had something like that in Secret Wars. Why do they just keep going back to this gimmick?
It's another excuse to do heroes versus heroes because they don't have any ideas and they don't want to create any villains. They don't want villains. I find it so disturbing how much these editors don't like the concept of the fucking supervillain being fought by the superhero. You are in superhero fucking comics, you weirdos. All you want to do is find another excuse to have hero fight hero because you think it's a sales boost when it really isn't at this point.
Nah, I'm with you, man. I'm tired of the heroes fighting heroes thing.
That's all this is. That's another excuse. I mean, you got a couple of maybe characters that are only sort of villain, but really, you don't even have that. I mean, you have Armageddon Girl. I don't even know who the fuck that is.
Doesn't that sound like a Kieron Gillen idea?
That sounds like a Kieron Gillen idea or a Gerry Duggan idea where he decided to turn Nature Girl into Armageddon Girl. And it wouldn't shock me if that's how this fucking ends up because they would find it so cute and amusing. The girl with the fucking deer horns on her head, she's Armageddon Girl now. Fuck you people.
If you would like more of this, because Doc and I have got a lot to say about X-Men, we do have the unfiltered version of this in the X-Men 32 review on the Patreon live right now. We've also got a Q&A coming up the next day. If you haven't checked out the Patreon and the Doc is Right tier, you are missing out on all the wonderful things Doc has to say, and there's a link in the video description.